great day to be alive and to be in community, yes? We are speaking all month long about unity, the principle of oneness, and cherishing the human family. This is the eighth prophetic justice principle from the Reverend James Forbes, to cherish the human family. What does it look like to really be in that vibration of love, to be in that vibration of honoring and recognizing the oneness within each other? And so we've talked this month about unity. We've talked about the radical implication of the principle of oneness. We have explored these things, and today we are looking at God and the universe. God and the universe. So we're kind of going big picture, right? We started with unity, then we looked last week at the principle of oneness and how that shows up in particular as it relates to honoring each other. And today we'll look at God and the universe, because this relationship of how we cherish each other is reflected in the relationship that we have with the divine. Humanity has been seeking that relationship with the divine, in other words, seeking to make sense of this thing all around us, what Ernest Holmes called the thing itself, right? The infinite intelligence of the universe, the mystery of the relationship between ourselves and all of creation. And throughout history, we have articulated that relationship in so many different ways. There's a wide range of beliefs of in God and about God, of what God is and what the universe is. And they range from very limited beliefs to magnificent, expanding, unlimited beliefs. The range corresponds to our personal development and our own understanding of our own lives and how we unfold the correspondence of our own understanding to that greater thing. If you listen to Ken Wilber talk about spiral dynamics, he'll talk about the level of human consciousness, the level of development throughout time, and that when we were in a primitive stage of consciousness, our reflection of God was a primitive God. You imagine primitive man and humanity seeking to make sense of the trembling earthquake, or of flash floods, or of droughts, or of simply the rotation of the stars at night and the sun and the moon and everything else. And so we project into that mystery that there must be some magical power, some mystical thing happening that we don't yet understand. And that journey of unfolding in that consciousness has continued throughout time. Have you noticed? I was talking the other day on a blog that I follow of one of my colleagues who writes for the Association for Global New Thoughts blog, and he was writing about new ideas in church and all these different things. And I was talking about the relevancy of our teaching. And I said, I believe that we're still relevant in the form that we are gathering here now, that no matter how advanced we get in terms of liberating ourselves from old religious dogma and new forms of technology, that there's something within the human heart that still wants to connect. There's a reason that we still want to gather in sacred space. We still want to sit in meditation together. We want to be uplifted by inspiring music. We want to hear a message. We want to engage in projects and activities. There's something within us that desires that human connection. I remember when banking started to change. And I remember when my bank, this was years ago, I was maybe a late teenager or early in college, and I remember my bank telling me that they were going to charge me more money if I went into the bank. Right? Do you remember that? It's like, no, you can do it through the ATM. That comes free with your account. But if you go inside and talk to a human being, we're going to charge you more money. And it was this whole thing about how the world of this was over 20 years ago. Hang on a second. So over 20 years ago, and they said, the world is changing, and so we want to, push people to that technology. This is long before smartphones and all that kind of stuff, right? But you've noticed that bank tellers haven't gone away. Right? There's something, and there are people that stand in line every day to deposit money and to talk to somebody. So no matter how far advanced we get in all of these things of technology, we still want to connect with each other and with something bigger than ourselves. Yes? And so I was speaking about the relevancy of spiritual community, and I had been listing a number of things. I talked about that and a couple other things, and I said, so long as there are still people out there, institutions and organizations and groups called by whatever name, as long as there are still people lying about God, then I think we have a valid voice at the table. And right? And somebody replied back, and they were like, they basically chastised me, and they were like, you can't say that. You got to be, you got to be respectful to your, multicultural religious, voices, and we're a philosophy that's friend to all, and all of this stuff. And so I responded back. I said, I understand, and I have friends of all different faith backgrounds. I've served on all kinds of interfaith committees. I'm not talking about being in a respectful, pluralistic society and engaged in respectful dialogue about the nuances and different ways in which we talk about God. When I say lying about God, what I'm talking about is anytime someone is representing a religious voice and says that God hates this group of people, or judges these, or does this to these, or all of these sorts of things, that's not religious difference. That's a projection of their own intolerance onto God, onto something that's bigger than they are. It's something that's bigger than their prejudice. I said, that's lying about God. I said, why is it lying about God? Because God doesn't do those things. Humanity does. Right? We divide each other. We label each other. We cast each other off. We decide who's in and who's out. We do all of those things to each other for all kinds of different reasons of the human heart and ego and protection and fear and all sorts of different things. We do that, and we project it onto God, and we've been doing it for millennia, right? So as long as that's still taking place and people are trying to pass that off as the divine, then I think our kind of spiritual community has a place at the table to say, hang on a second, there's a different idea. There's a different thought. There's a new thought that you can have about God, right? And so if you listen to Ken Wilber, he'll take you through all the kind of things, the archaic God, divinity as a strong instinctual force, magical God that's located, the divine power in human ego and magical capacities to change the world through ritual and spells. A mythic God that's located not on earth but in a heavenly paradise with entrance gained by living according to covenants and rules that's given by that God. And then we move to a kind of a mental God, a God of rationalization and demythologizing as the ground of being that underlines and underlies all form of existence, which is kind of where New Thought is. But then there's even something more, which is the integral God. And the integral God is the God of all beings, and the God that says all of the ways in which humanity has expressed this relationship are all valid. They're valid because the only rule we need to really know about spirituality is consciousness is all that there is. Consciousness is all that there is. If anybody asks you, what is that community that you go to? What do they teach? Just say, consciousness is all there is. If you want to abbreviate it, you can just say CIE. Here, let me write down what they teach. Here you go. There you go. And I go, what is that? Consciousness is everything. Consciousness is everything. And because consciousness is everything, that consciousness is used as first to understand our relationship with that which is bigger than us, and then we project it back out onto that thing and make it that thing. And then we say, see, it's acting according to exactly the way I told you it would. Well, of course it is, because consciousness is everything. You understand? And so if consciousness is everything, then all of those forms of divinity are valid because they are all projections or intersections of relationship with humanity at one point in time in history. So they all have value, they all have meaning, and yet God is truly bigger than all of that. God is more expansive. So the integral God doesn't say this level is better. See, the first few, we go archaic, magical, mythical, mental, etc. Those are all ones that try to one-up each other. This God is better than that God. Our God, see, when we went from a nomadic and God was this mystery of the animals and the universe around us, and then we got into tribes, and then suddenly God became tribal. Why did God become tribal? Because we were living in tribes, and so the God of our understanding had to protect us from them. Right? And they had their own God, and the God of their understanding was going to protect them. And if we were going to come in and take their village, then God was on our side and was going to protect us. Or if they were coming in to take our stuff from our village, then God was on our side and we were going to defeat them and keep them out. You understand? God was always on the side of the one who's articulating what God is. You'll notice that in Genesis, it goes on talking about the creation of the world, and you have to get to the third line before it says, then God said. And when I was in a class with Will Coleman, you all know Dr. Will Coleman, teaching biblical scholarship, and I was in a class with him, and we got to that line, God said, and he said, stop. And he said, who's writing? Right? Who's writing the text? And you'll notice that, so what you notice is that somebody's behind the pen, somebody's behind the mallet and the whatever they were doing back then, right? Right? Somebody's did the mallet and the chisel or whatever it was, but at some point somebody says, and then God said. But notice that God doesn't say anything until the author gives them a voice. You and I give voice to God through our articulation of what our understanding God is. And God doesn't have a voice until we say, this is what God is. So other people have said this is what, but that's not God to you. God can only be what you say it is when you say it is that. We've accepted and adopted perhaps other ideas about divinity. We've accepted and adopted. We've come into this world. Oh, those people have said, and they've said for 1,000 years that this is what God, but you don't really know what God is until you articulate it for yourself. This is the genius of what Ernest Holmes brings to the table for us. This is the genius of what Centers for Spiritual Living and the Spiritual Living Center of Atlanta and all of our partner communities. This is the genius of what we bring to spiritual understanding and to those that are on their spiritual quest. Ernest Holmes says, I would have this church be a church of principle. For our church is not a building, even though it's a nice one. He said this, not about us. He was in another church when he said this. This comes from a church dedication he gave at the Whitaker Church in Whitaker, California. He says, our church is not a building, even though it's a nice one. Our church is not an eloquent preacher, although that is good too. For our future is a matter of one person who has come to know really what God is. Our future is a matter of one person who has come to know really what God is. And from that one person to the next, to the next. And so the human quest is to know God, to know the universe, and to know God and the universe is to know ourselves. So what is it that we know about God or the divine? Or I like to replace the word God with infinite intelligence or divine idea. God is our relationship with the thing itself. This is why when we think we know so much about God, we are thinking of and talking about our relationship as if it were the thing itself. Is God one among the many? Is God the Father? Is God the Son? Is God the Goddess? Is God the still small voice within? Is God the judge? Is God on the throne in the heavenly clouds? What do you know God to be? God is your relationship to the thing itself. Holmes defined the infinite intelligence of the universe as the thing itself. I love this phrase because the thing itself means that which if the hand is pointing to the moon, right? We're not talking about what the hand pointing, but we're talking about the moon itself, the thing itself, not the thing that's pointing to it. But see, here's the trick. Language is a symbol, and so language is always pointing to something. It can never really be the thing itself. So when we're articulating about the divinity and the infinite intelligence of the universe, we're talking about something that we can never really capture. Our language can point to it, but the thing itself is always beyond our capacity to articulate it. And therefore, God can only be our relationship to that thing at any one given time. But here's the thing. Our relationship can grow. Our relationship can change. Our relationship can be of love. Our relationship can be of indifference. Our relationship can be of beauty. Our relationship can be of harmony and wholeness. Our relationship can be of so many different things. God is that which understands and controls that which we do not. There is something that knows, and that something must be intelligent. And so we've gone through all of these different iterations from primitive man, the Lord of the Beast, to projecting human agency onto events that God with personality likes these things, doesn't like these people, does these things, doesn't do those things, intervenes in these ways, doesn't intervene in these ways, so on and so forth. When we were an agricultural society, primarily, God took on the qualities of the divine feminine because we understood our relationship with the earth and creation and the intimacy of birthing things and the cycle of things. And then when we got into cities and tribal living, then a archaic and primitive patriarchal consciousness took over and separated the female divinity out of that understanding, and God became judging and ruling and controlling and tribalistic and all of these things. All of this is to say, God is our relationship to this infinite thing. And therefore, the primary task of our being here is to be in relationship with that thing within inside of ourselves and around us. And what if we were in relationship in such a degree? What if we could consider the radical possibility that the entire reason that we actually have a cognitive impulse to think of God as a divine reflection of ourselves is because we are God itself. That God is the impulse within us to think about God. God seeking to know itself is the thought that we have about, well, I wonder what God is. God is that thought. Seeking to have its way with you, saying, explore, understand, go deep, get to know me, get to know this divinity, get to know this love, get to know your neighbor. That's why in the Muslim text it says, why have you made us of so many different tribes and nations and languages? And the divine says, so that you might know one another. So that you might know one another. Because if you speak differently, you're going to have to ask each other questions. You're going to have to engage with each other. You're going to have to sit down and say, how are you? And how are your children? And how's your mama now? Right? Right? So what if we responded to the world and every being in it as though it was an expression of God? What if we truly responded to the world and everything in it as though it was an expression of God? Is this really possible for us? Or is it just fantasy? Caught in a landslide. No escape from reality. Anyone? Sorry, I drifted for a moment. For those of you playing sermon bingo, that would be Queen. All right. Ernest Holmes says it this way: you belong to the universe in which you live. You are one with the creative genius back of this vast array of ceaseless motion, this original flow of life. You are as much a part of it as the sun and the earth and the air, and there's something within you telling you this, like a voice echoing from some mountaintop of inner vision, like a light whose origin no man has seen, like an impulse welling up from an invisible source. Your soul belongs to the universe. Your mind is an outlet through which the creative intelligence of the universe seeks fulfillment. You belong to the universe in which you live. You are one with the creative genius back of this vast array of ceaseless motion. There have been numerous studies on the cognition of children. If you remember, my background is in child development, family relations, and I remember looking at the studies of the cognition of children that have shown the instinctual propensity of children of what they call substance dualism. Ooh, substance dualism. Put that down on your trivia board. Substance dualism. Substance dualism is the belief that the body and the mind and soul are distinct in nature and characteristic. In other words, I could be the child can have a relationship with the physical being, but then also have a relationship with the soul of that being separate from the body. And that the distinction between those things are, we call it imagination. We say, oh, look, the child has an imagination. No, the child has a relationship that is ongoing and real. It's called substance dualism. I have a relationship with you, but if you're not here, I can still talk to you. I have a relationship with William does it all the time. I have a relationship with the cartoons that I'm watching, but then I can still talk to them even when they're not here. Oh, every day he calls up the Paw Patrol in the car as we're going somewhere. He says, Daddy, I got to call Paw Patrol. I said, call him up, son. Says, hello, Paw Patrol. This morning on I-85, he called up Paw Patrol. He said, Paw Patrol, come and stop these cars that are going too fast. I said, is Chase on the case? He said, yes, and Ryan too. Some of you don't know Paw Patrol. That's substance dualism. This means that, what does this mean? Why is this significant? As a cognitive function of our brain as infants and toddlers and children, it means that we enter the world with an innate sense, an untaught and unforced and unprompted idea that we are more than just our physical bodies. Unprompted, untaught, unforced idea, an innate sense that we are more than our bodies. And we have had this in our brain cognitively since the beginning of existence. And if that's true, then what happens is, out of that relationship, seeking to understand that greater self, that soul self, we have come to articulate this thing called God, this relationship that we have. And so what this all means is this. Our task in a spiritual community that believes in the oneness of all things and believes that there's only one presence and one power manifesting in, through, and as all life and all creation, our task is to cultivate that relationship with the divine self and to walk in the world as that relationship, and in doing so bring healing, bring health, bring prosperity, bring joy, bring creativity, bring life with us, not because of the book we read or the prayers that we do or the foods that we eat. All of those things are cultural expressions, all of which are divine and beautiful, but because we are carrying with us a relationship with the divine in ourselves that we have cultivated. And only you can do that for you. You don't get anywhere because you come to this church. You only get somewhere because you've gone there and you've done the work in your own mind. You can be in this church for 40 years and still suffer from lack and limitation. Or you can be in this church for 2 months and get free and liberated from lack and limitation if you do the work, if you walk the walk. So our task is to walk the walk with our God, to walk with our divinity understanding into the world of things. And let me tell you how healing that is when we do that. There's a story in the Gospel of John that I want to share with you. And we'll just take a slight detour for just a moment. It's not a detour at all. It's in the chapter of John, and it says this. It's the story of the healing at the pool. Some of you may know it. It says this. Sometime later, Jesus went up to Jerusalem for the feast of the Jews, and now they're near Jerusalem, near the Sheep's Gate at the pool. And we're going to break all this down in just a moment, so hang on to that. Sheep's Gate at the pool, which is in Aramaic called Bethesda, and which is surrounded by 5 covered, in this translation it says colonnades, or some translations it says porches, or we're in the South, we could say veranda. Amen. Right? 5 covered verandas, porches, sections, if you will. And here a great number of disabled people used to lie, the blind, the lame, the paralyzed. And one who had been there as an invalid for 38 years. When Jesus saw him, he went there and learned that he had been in this condition for a very long time, and he asked him, "Do you want to get well?" The man said to Jesus, not knowing it was Jesus, by the way, because he says, "Sir." He says, "Sir, I have no one to help me to the pool when the water is stirred. While I am trying to get in, someone else goes down ahead of me." Then Jesus says to him, "Get up, pick up your mat and walk." And at once the man was cured, and he picked up his mat and walked. We're gonna stop there. I'm going to come back to some of the interesting things that happen after that, but let's pause there for a moment. So first of all, the pool at Bethesda, just outside the city gates of Jerusalem, near the Sheep's Gate. The Sheep's Gate, a sheep, a symbol of innocence and purity, and Bethesda meaning healing. In other words, there was a hot springs, there was a hot tub section. You understand what I'm saying? And people gathered there, and the waters were healing. So it was very likely a hot spring mineral pool type thing, right? And people would get cured. To this day, right? People go, I don't know what they are here around here, but there's somewhere you can go and get into the mineral hot springs and do all that stuff. Where is it? Hot Springs, Georgia. Well, that's easy to find. Thank you very much for that. I don't even have to write that one down. If you're in New Mexico, where I grew up, you go to Ojai Caliente. If you're in Portland, there's a place to go. There are places everywhere, right? So forever we've been doing this. We go to hot springs. We gather in the hot springs and the mineral waters. I love Ojai Caliente because there's not only all the different mineral baths, but then there's the mud. Oh, and you can just put all that mud all over you, and then you lay out in that New Mexico sun and you just bake, and the mud just crusts on you, and then you flake it all off, and then rinse off, and your skin is just smooth as a baby's bottom. It's wonderful. And apparently have healing properties in the mud, but I wouldn't know it. I just go there to lather myself in mud. Who cares? So Bethesda is this healing pool place. You understand? Now, we don't know if they got mud or not, but we do know that they've got 5 colonnades, 5 verandas, 5 places where the people hang out. And this one man had been there for 38 years. Jesus asked him if he wants to get well. And what he says is, I have no one to help me down to the water when the waters get stirred. The Hebrew symbol for 38 means a holy blessing. In other words, so we would interpret this metaphysically as the man was there for long enough to get an insight. Long enough to get an insight. 5 verandas. What else do we have 5 of? 5 fingers on one hand, 5 days of the week. I know we have 7 of those. What else do we have 5 of? Oh, I know. 5 senses. What are all the ways in which we can be invalid or disabled from our understanding of our innate healing power? Through sight, through touch, through smell, through sound, right? Through all of the 5 senses that we separate ourselves from our understanding. Keep in mind, the man doesn't know that this is Jesus. The man simply knows that the man says to him, do you want to be well? He says, I got no one to take me down to the waters. And Jesus responds to him and he says, take up your bed, take up your mat and walk. And what does the man do? Takes up his mat and walks. Now here's the interesting thing. He doesn't even walk to the water. He just walks right up on out of that place. Right? He just got his mat in his hand. Now, why is this significant? Because when it has nothing to do with this man being, the healer being Jesus. Later on it says, if we were in the old church, they'd say, go on, Pastor, read. They would. He would say, and on the day which this took place was the Sabbath. And so the Jews said to the men who had been healed, it is the Sabbath, and the law forbids you to carry your mat. He'd been there 38 years sitting on that mat. And they had the nerve to tell him, today is Sunday, you need to sit down. No, but listen, watch now. So he replies, the man who, he says, the man who made me well. He doesn't even know that it's Jesus. He says, the man who made me well said to pick up my bed and walk. And so they asked him, who is this man? And he went to point him out, and Jesus was gone. He slipped through the crowd. He finds him later, and Jesus speaks to him. But here's what I want to say. He's there long enough to get this insight. When we walk with our understanding of God, when we walk with the embodiment that God is all there is, when we walk with the understanding that we are one with this divine connection, our presence is healing to those around us. Our presence is liberating because we're not living through rules. We're not, and don't you know the moment that you claim your liberation as this man does, somebody's going to come along and tell you why you can't do it. Right? Somebody's going to come along and say, don't you know that people like you aren't allowed to do such and such? And don't you know you're too old to go back to school? And don't you know you're too this to do that? And don't you know that that's not the way it happens if you're going to be successful in that field? And don't you know? And you say, but the insight that I received, the man who healed me, the man who told me to take up my bed and walk, I received an insight that God is within me. And that's all that I need is that understanding of the divinity. I don't need the rules. I don't need the dogma. I don't need the structure. I don't need anything else. I certainly don't need your rules about what day of the week it is. All I need is to pick up my bed and walk. I am up and out of here. Right? I'm gone. And so our presence liberates, you see. Life, Ernest Holmes says in The Science of Mind, he says this. He says, life becomes to us the particular thing we need when we believe that it becomes to us that particular thing. Life becomes to us the particular thing we need when we believe that it becomes to us that particular thing. And if I was writing the text, I would have said, and not a moment sooner. And not a moment sooner. In other words, it moves through our consciousness. And so life became to that man the particular thing he needed when he believed that it became to him that particular thing. When the insight came, take up your bed and walk, it was as if he was waiting for somebody to help him. He was waiting for somebody to, the water's stirring. Oh, I can hear it. It's beginning to bubble. It was probably a geyser or something, right? So, the waters are beginning to stir. The mineral baths are percolating. I need somebody to help me down there because everybody else here needs help in getting down there. And somebody else got ahead of me. I guess I got to sit here. 38 years, long enough to get a divine insight and to receive a message from somebody who was walking in his wholeness, not announcing his title, not announcing anything else, but simply being who he was being with his relationship with the divinity within him, became a liberating presence. And he said, I have the power within me. I never thought of that before, but I could just pick up my bed and walk. And he picked up his bed. As soon as he got up, he went, I don't even need that mineral water. I don't even know what's in that mud they're putting all over themselves. Huh? Yeah, get up on out of here. So our most pressing task is to know God for ourselves. Ernest Holmes said this. He said, the church of God is not built with hands. It is eternal in the heavens. It is not lighted with candles. Its dome is heaven, and it's lighted by the stars of God's illumined thought. Each member in his separate star shall draw the things as he sees it, for the God of things as they are. Here, all people recognize the God within their own souls and ask for and see no other God. When you can look upon creation, all of creation, as the perfect work of a perfect God, you will become a member of this church. I doubt very much if the church universal admits members from the church individual. When you can see in the saint and the sinner one and the same person, when you can realize that the one who kneels before the altar and the one who lies drunk in the street is the same one, when you can love one as much as you do the other, no doubt you will be able to qualify. As it is now, we have too many preachers who do not understand. They have no purpose. Too many prayers, too many creeds, too many teachers that have no message. Too many churches, too many learned people, and too few thinkers. The kingdom of heaven cometh not by observation. It is the still small voice within the soul that speaks. Nothing human can contain this. It feels the limitation of form and ceremony and longs for the freedom of spirit, the great outdoors, the great God of everywhere, alone in the desert or in the forest by the restless ocean, looking up at the stars. Man breathes forth these words, with only my Maker and me. You are the place where God is waking up. You are the place where divinity is being revealed in this time in human history. You are the relationship that God is seeking. The divinity, the divine intelligence of the universe is seeking an outlet in, through, and as you. And what would happen if you lived in such deep relationship with that your presence liberated everyone and everything around you? Yes? Yes. One last thing, and then we'll pray. Let me invite the practitioners forward. And I'll close with this prayer. I think I've shared it here before. It's the danger of being still somewhat new. I don't know where I've used this particular thing last. But it is a poem by Cynthia Langston Kirk called Stripped by God. And we'll use it to simply move into prayer. So take a breath. Reverend Cynthia says this: what would happen if I pursued God? If I filled my pockets with openness, grabbed a thermos half full of fortitude, and crawled into the cave of the Almighty, nose first, eyes peeled, heart hesitantly following, until I was face to face with the raw, pulsing beat of the mystery? What if I entered and it looked different? than anyone had ever described? What if the cave was too large to be fully known, far too extensive to be comprehended by one person or one group, too vast for any one dogma or doctrine? Would I shatter at such a thought, perish from paradox or puzzle, shrink and shrivel before the power? Would God be diminished if I lived a question rather than a statement? Would I lose my faith as I discovered the magnitude of grace? Oh, the willingness to explore, to leave my tiny vocabulary at the entrance and stand before you naked, stripped of pretense and rigidity, disrobed of self-righteousness and tidy packages, stripped of all that holds me at a distance from you and your world. Strip me, O God, then clothe me in curiosity and courage. Take a breath. Oh, we seek in this moment to be stripped of all pretense, of all tiny packages of knowing, structures of knowing, and stand raw before the mighty mystery, that it may know us through our own consciousness, through our own development, through our own curiosity and courage and willingness to explore in our own life, to see that at every corner and every turn of our life, good, bad, or worse, or indifferent, God has been there. The divine intelligence of the universe has been speaking and articulating itself to know us as a divine relationship of wholeness and harmony. And that its only intention, this one power, one presence, and one magnificent energy of divine love and grace, its only intention is to know itself fully as me and as you. In doing so, it seeks harmony through all of our relationships. It seeks full expression of our life, in our career, in our family, in our development, in our creative expression. It seeks health and well-being and all of our needs met. It seeks to know us as all of this and more. And the only thing that's been standing at the door of that expression, of that divinity, knowing us as those things, has been our own thoughts of lack and limitation, our own obstruction of doubt and uncertainty, our own questioning, our own rigidity of form and structure. And now, in this moment, in this breath, it's the opportunity to fling wide the open doors and the windows, and to let the light and the magnificence of the divine intelligence of the universe pour itself into our being, to illuminate our heart and our mind with every desire of our heart for our life, for our children, for our well-being, and for the well-being of all people and all things. In this place, God begins to articulate itself as you and as me, and as a world that works for everyone, because suddenly we become the agents through which that vision moves. We become the vehicle through which harmony, wholeness, justice, charity, compassion, oneness begin to reveal themselves in the acts of human behavior and make a world that works for everyone. For this and so much more, I'm truly grateful and thankful for the bright beacon that Centers for Spiritual Living and the Spiritual Living Center of Atlanta is in the world. I'm truly grateful and thankful as I simply release this word, knowing that it is done, and so it is. Thank you. Peace and blessings.